Hey guys, and welcome to my newest PowerPoint. Today we're going to be talking about the causes of the Spanish-American War. We're really going to be looking at these terms: yellow journalism, Monroe Doctrine, the USS Maine, and expansionism. So a couple of definitions. We need to review a little vocabulary first before we really hop into this. This word yellow journalism is a style of journalism, which is writing about, taking interviews, newspaper, stuff like that. It's all journalism. Yellow journalism is a style of journalism that makes dishonest use of outrageous, shocking, and exaggerating stories to attract the reader. So, like things like Abraham Lincoln was a woman. Clearly, Abraham Lincoln is not a woman, but it's going to make you want to pick up a paper and read it and figure out exactly what they're talking about. This is a shocking story. How about space invaders threaten the Earth? Clearly, space invaders are not threatening the Earth, but this is another example of yellow journalism. These are just stories that are really exaggerated to make people want to read it more. This term, Monroe Doctrine, stated that Europeans trying to colonize any territories in the North or South America would be seen as an act of aggression requiring U.S. to get involved and stop them. This was just a way for the U.S. to tell the rest of the world, hey, stay away from North and South America. Reinforcements, the addition of strengthening or supporting material to make something stronger or more durable. Like the U.S. was starting to lose the battle until the reinforcements showed up and helped them win. This term harbor, a part of a body of water near a coast in which ships can anchor safely. It's a little bit more inland. Ships can kind of sail into this, so they're protected by the weather and big waves and stuff like that. So what we're going to be looking at is this area of the world. So we got the United States up here. This is Florida, but we're going to be paying a lot of attention to Cuba and some of these other islands, Puerto Rico, and in this area. So when we're talking about it, now you have an idea of where it is. It's all down in the Caribbean Sea, right by the Bahamas. A little bit of background. While the US, Japan, and several European powers were gaining colonies, Spain's empire was getting smaller. By the late 1800s, Spain's once large American empire was reduced to two island colonies, Cuba and Puerto Rico. Excited for independence, some Cubans started to revolt. They wanted to be free of Spain. Many Americans felt bad for them, and they realized, hey, this is kind of similar to what America went through during the American Revolution. They sympathized with Cuba's fight for independence, and some wanted to annex the island. What I'm going to ask you to do is, in 3 or more sentences, I want you to make a prediction about what you think is going to happen with Cuba. The Monroe Doctrine. We've already talked a few minutes about it. You have an idea of what it is, but let's talk a little bit more because it's pretty important. As Spain was being removed from their colonies by their colonists, people who preferred independence, the United States feared that European nations would come in and take control of these weakened colonies. They said, you know what, Spain, they might not be as strong as they were a few years ago, but, they still had control over these colonies and still had a navy and a military to back it up. Without Spain being in there anymore, who's going to protect these colonies? And other countries like England might say, hey, there's a good colony right there. Let's go in and take it over. So in 1823, President Monroe passed what's called the Monroe Doctrine. It was a statement warning Europe not to mess with the Americas. The Monroe Doctrine had 4 basic points. U.S. would not interfere with the affairs of Europe. U.S. would recognize and not interfere with European colonies that already existed. So anybody from Europe that already had a colony somewhere in the Americas, the United States pretty much said, okay, we'll leave you alone. The Western Hemisphere was off limits to colonization. So this area all in through here was not allowed to have anybody else from the rest of the world come in and take over. And the U.S. would consider any attempt to colonize or interfere with the Western Hemisphere as a hostile act, as an act of war. Like Hawaii, Cuba and Puerto Rico grew in a large amount of sugarcane and were significantly closer to the United States than Hawaii was. The only problem was that Cuba and Puerto Rico were still a Spanish colony. Some of the United States wanted to annex both of these lands. We talked about this word annex, which means to take over or take control of and make part of the United States. So they argued that we needed to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. And they said no European country should have territories in the Western Hemisphere. They wanted to use this Monroe Doctrine to try to kick Spain out of Cuba and Puerto Rico. In 1868, the Cubans staged an unsuccessful revolt against Spanish control. They tried to kick Spain out of Cuba, but they lost. To stop the revolt, the Spanish moved men, women, and children into what's called reconcentration camps. They were forced to live with horrible food and medical care, causing tens of thousands of people to die. This picture, while tough to look at, is what a lot of Cuban people look like at these reconcentration camps. They had very, very little food and were put in these horrible conditions. And this right here is a picture of a man sitting on top of a giant pile of bones from people that were killed during this time. This is an example of yellow journalism. It might be exaggerated a little bit, but pretty much it's saying kill everyone over 10 years old. And at the bottom, this is Spain's definition of maintaining order. It's an example of yellow journalism. While they probably did not just go around and shoot every person who was over 10 years old, this is just an example of showing how horrible some of these camps were, that people were killed for no reason. Sympathy. Sympathy is that word that we talked about, meaning feeling bad for or being able to relate to another group. As sympathy for the Cubans grew, more and more Americans wanted to go to war to help them out. But unfortunately, not enough Americans wanted to start a war with Spain in order to help Cuba. You know, it wasn't too long ago we fought the Civil War and we were still trying to rebuild from that. Spain warned the U.S. that they were willing to fight to protect the island of Cuba. In case of trouble, President McKinley sent new battleships, USS Maine, to Cuba's capital, Havana, the harbor. So he wanted to send this USS Maine, this brand new battleship, into Havana's harbor, which is in the capital of Cuba, to pretty much say, hey, we're going to help you guys out, but we're not going to interfere completely, but we're going to make sure people are safe. So let's look at the causes of the Spanish-American War. We have four main ones that we're going to focus on. U.S. expansionism, which is U.S. expanding, being imperialistic, the Monroe Doctrine, the USS Maine, and the yellow journalism. U.S. expansionism. U.S. was greedy to expand. They really wanted to get bigger and better and stronger. Many felt the only way to survive was to grow larger and bring in more natural resources. Cuba was close to American soil, only 90 miles from Miami, and brought in lots of money with the sale of sugarcane. Cuba had already gone through one revolution and failed. Many people related with the cause of the Cubans since it was similar to the American Revolution. People are looking at it and saying, Cuba wants to be free. Let's go in and help them. Many Americans were living in Cuba as farmers and merchants. So there's a lot of Americans already in Cuba. They had a close connection with the Cuban people. You can see how close Cuba is to Florida right here. It's only this area right here is only 90 miles. This is the USS Maine. This is one of our newest battleships. The U.S. president was nervous from reports in Cuba. He decided to send the USS Maine to the Havana port in Cuba. The Maine was in the port for three weeks when a massive explosion sank the huge battleship. These are pictures of what it looked like after the explosion went off. The explosion killed over 260 U.S. soldiers. No one knew what caused the explosion. Many Americans soon blamed Spain. Chants could be heard throughout America, like "Remember the Maine" and "Free Cuba." Hoping to avoid war, President McKinley offered a solution with Spain, but they refused to respond. Soon after, the president had to declare war. This idea of yellow journalism comes up again. U.S. newspapers were looking for ways to sell newspapers and magazines. They jumped in an opportunity to report about the Cuban concentration camps. Those were the pictures that we saw earlier about the guy sitting on the bones and how horrible the people looked. They turned to yellow journalism to gain more customers from their competition. They started printing papers with things like this to try to really get people to buy their papers and to feel horrible about what happened. Crisis is at hand, Spanish treachery. That's an example of yellow journalism because we didn't really know that Spain was to cause the USS Maine to explode. But selling a paper like this is a lot easier than if they put up something that said like, "Oh, no one really knows what happened. Accident on the Maine." We're not really sure. It doesn't really sell a lot of papers. How about this one? This is another example of yellow journalism. $50,000 reward. Who destroyed the Maine? $50,000. That was a lot of money back then. $50,000 for the detection of the perpetrator of the Maine outrage. So they're offering $50,000 for whoever can tell who sunk the Maine. This right here would definitely get people to buy some papers. This is all example of a yellow journalism. Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo. They don't even know what exactly exploded it, but look at the picture. Do you think this was a primary or secondary source? Okay. Was there really somebody there that took this picture, or do you think it's a drawing afterwards? Do you think they're really able to get these people flying in the air, or is this an example of yellow journalism? This is an example of yellow journalism right now because, this is meant to really affect the reader. They want to show how horrible this was. They have all these sailors flying through the air in this horrible explosion. Okay, that is the end of my PowerPoint. We are going to talk a lot about this in class, so I want to kind of give you guys a background of what caused the war. So we will get back into class, and you will have a couple questions to answer at the end of this PowerPoint. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a fantastic day.